we would just begin in prayer together. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, this day we just offer you all of our prayers, works, joys, and challenges in a special way. A prayer of gratitude for the ministries that you call us to, the gift that is ministry. Help us to always be aware that we are always recipients of the gift of your love and sharing that love with others. In a particular way today, just want to take the moment to offer prayers for all those people in our lives, especially those that weigh on our hearts or that we promise to pray for and that we feel called to accompany. So I invite you to share those names or intentions now. Pray for Megan.
Pray for Billy. Cancer diagnosis. I pray for Tara.
For John.
For Larry.
For Bill. Susan.
Mary. For Diane.
My godchildren and siblings.
All Saints Parish.
For Rita. Stephen. For Lisa.
Lord, for all these names and those in the silence of our hearts, we offer this prayer with your mother, our mother, the Blessed Virgin Mary, who accompanies us as a spiritual guide as we pray together. Hail Mary,
full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Well, thanks for coming back. A couple of people have been asking, I did bring physical hard copies of the intervention that I had shared in the keynote. So I'm just going to pass these around the tables. If you'd like to take a hard copy, you may. And I'd also share that the intervention is available online. You can just Google my name and intervention, I think came up, but also I know it's on the website for Grotto Network. And so if you search Grotto Network, Synod intervention or my name, that will come up as well. So I had given sort of an introduction to this theme of spiritual accompaniment in the keynote. In this breakout, I think we can be a bit more practical and have more of a work team environment. Sort of put together an action plan for us. But I would love to start just with what you're interested in talking about, because we can take this a number of directions. And I'm aware that I covered a lot of different things that may or may not have either raised more questions or answered questions you brought today. So before we start, what are you hoping to get out of this next hour? Are there specific questions or hopes?
I would like to see, how to build a community, but specifically in our parish. We basically have two separate parishes in that we have English speakers and non-English speakers. So I'd like to hear something about building community and become a whole parish.
Thank you. Others? Yes, ma'am.
I want to know people who are unchurched, not really attending, and not even, I have a particular family in mind.
Sure.
And so it would be mom and dad and Splendid and my mom and children from different fathers.
Sure. So how to accompany
The same mother.
families who are not churched?
That's right.
Yeah.
And where to begin?
Where to begin? That's a great way of saying. Great. Yes.
I'd like to hear more about how to develop accompaniers.
I'm speaking specifically of RCIA because I am one person, and yet every person that we bring into the church needs that. And so, like I'm specifically thinking of sponsors and
We'll talk about that already, so that's good. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about us, the ones that are very active in the church. How do we rid ourselves of our complacency?
Well, it's a great question.
It just comes on me sometimes.
Yeah.
I don't like it. There.
Great. Well, we can certainly touch on those things. And feel free, as we're talking in the breakout, to raise your hand, and we can sort of have intermittent conversations as we go along. I prefer that style to giving another talk or something. I'm just going to scoot back as well, knowing that I'm avoiding that. You can see the people over here a bit better. Not because you smell or anything. You don't want to accompany this. So I wanted to start with a quote that I didn't read from the intervention, or from the talk that I gave, but I mentioned it in brief in the intervention, which is from Evangelii Gaudium, where Pope Francis really, in a substantive way, breaks open this ministry of accompaniment. If you haven't read Joy of the Gospel, it's required reading for ministry leaders, and is worth revisiting because it really is, again, to use analogy, sort of the Magna Carta of the papacy of Pope Francis, providing the missionary impulse. And as well, I'll say, Pope Francis has published a number of documents, including Laudato Si. In this most recent document, Christus Vivit, Christ is Alive, I think it's really helpful to read that document on young people as a triptych, with Evangelii Gaudium in the center, telling us the missionary impulse of where we go, with Amoris Laetitia on the joy of love, on family life, on one side, and then Christ is Alive on young people on the other. I think they're best read together in providing the orientation of missionary discipleship, the rootedness of our call to holiness within the context of family life, the domestic church, with a particular pastoral attention on young people who are both the products of family life, but also, in the Vatican language, those young youth or young adults are themselves those forming families. Because when the Vatican says youth, by the way, they mean like 18-year-olds and 25-year-olds and 30-year-olds. They don't mean 12-year-olds, which is very confusing because they talk about popular youth ministry in Christ is Alive in a synod. It doesn't mean middle school dodgeball. It means like discernment retreats for 20-year-olds. So that we have to kind of change our language a bit because internationally youth or jóvenes or giovani means more like young adults. Not that youth ministry isn't important, but I think when we're talking about young people, the seriousness of life choices is what Pope Francis is keying in on. But in Evangelii Gaudium, he says, and I read part of this in my intervention, I'd like to read this whole passage about accompaniment. The church will have to initiate everyone, priests, religious, and laity, into this art of accompaniment, which teaches us to remove our sandals before the sacred ground of the other. The pace of this accompaniment must be steady and reassuring, reflecting our closeness and our compassionate gaze, which also heals, liberates, and encourages growth in the Christian life. I just find that such a beautiful, buttery quote from Pope Francis. That's just lovely.
What's the number?
169.
Thank you.
Initiate everyone into this art of accompaniment, which teaches us to remove our sandals before the sacred ground of the other. I wanted to start this particular reflection together by reflecting on our own lives. And so I talked ad nauseam probably about the ministry of accompaniment in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, and the lives of the saints. But to remember that we ourselves are not outside of salvation history, but are active players and actors within it. That the story of God continues in this era of life, that we are just as connected. And so there's beautiful saints, happily, who minister or express this ministry of accompaniment, like Saint Therese, which was not too long ago. I think also of Jean Vanier, the gentleman who founded the L'Arche community, if you're familiar with him. He weighs heavily in my heart in a beautiful way. If you're not familiar with Vanier's writing, he started these homes for persons with developmental disabilities to live in community together and to have people who don't have developmental disabilities to live with them. You may know that the popular spiritual author and teacher Henry Nouwen chose to live in one of these large communities for the last decade or so of his life. And so I think that's a beautiful model of how we accompany. Certainly, the Catholic Worker Movement, Dorothy Day, is another of these contemporary saints who puts into practice this person-to-person, knowing the name of people, giving human dignity, not through a big government program or institution or program itself, but through individual people and relationships. But that we ourselves are the products of this ministry of accompaniment. So I want to just take about 5 minutes for reflection and discussion at our tables to ask 3 questions. Who has accompanied you in your life? What are their names? What did they do? Second question. What did they do? And then what were their qualities? Who accompanied you? What did they do? And what were their qualities? So just take a minute, if you have paper, maybe sketch some names down. Think through your childhood, the parish you went to, how you were raised, maybe key conversion experiences, middle school, high school, going to college, as you transition out of college into the workplace. If you're married, as you got married, or went through marriage preparation, in early years of family life, to today, and maybe moving from house to house, or different priests who've been at the parish, sort of, as you distill your experience, who are those names that pop up? That we can't tell our story of faith without people's names, without those proper nouns of people in our life. And so just take a minute and then flesh out, okay, of those people, what do they do in terms of this ministry of accompaniment? And what were their qualities? So let's take another minute of maybe quiet just to jot down some thoughts there. And then we'll share this in pairs at our table. So now, even if you're still thinking through, pair up, and maybe share 1 or 2 of those names and those answers. What do they do, and what were the qualities with another person? If there's 3 of you, that's fine too at some of these tables. But we'll just take 3 to 4 minutes for this, so make sure it's not a monologue, but both people have a chance to share. And then we'll come back in 3 or 4 minutes.
Sorry, my husband James, but just his deep faith and trust in God, and also a lot of scripture. I told a lot of scripture. I mean, I use a lot of going to mass, but I kind of help with that and now that's what
both lost their
They can get 6, 7, 4-year-olds. Because I used to do 4-year-olds for 20 years. So, like, one of the hardest things I had to do was to gain her to move on to a 6th grade. Well, because for her, she was inspiration. But I never met anyone who loved Jesus and Mary as much as I did.
Were you used to it as a...
Now I do 6, but I used to. Yeah.
And that's where I...
No. I never did. No, I'm in real estate.
But he was
My mother has always, it's interesting because she died earlier this year, and my sister came from Texas. And took a sort of like out of it. We spent a lot of time. She was like praying the rosary with her when she started getting anxious. She was in town. Because that was amazing. Because not many people would do that. They go to church and the original. Nice. Those are nice. Tell me a name, though. Yeah.
No, my dad's not there.
Oh,
So I didn't go to that. She's always but she did. I heard some prayers. Or I went to bed. Sometimes we prayed at meals. And she always made sure I went to bed.
You didn't feel that.
One more minute to share together.
That's why I feel like it's been always and my husband over the years, I married him since he was born. This summer, Andrew is my oldest sister.
she's got a joy.
The other two. Praying back then.
Eventually you'll be a
Got more. I mean, I could also understand the issue, you know what I mean? It's just that I thought the ones that had impact on my life.
All right, let's circle back together as a large community. All right, I'll try my youth ministry now. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. There we go. I'm just treat people like teenagers. We're awake. They keep talking. That's a good thing you were talking though. So the 3 questions, in terms of who accompanied you, and what are their names, what do they do, and what are their qualities? Let's get a running list, maybe at least 10 or a dozen of those qualities of spiritual accompaniment. If you're taking notes on today, this is always a fun place to write down notes because it's always a really rich listing. So let's try to get a dozen qualities of those spiritual accompaniers. We could probably spend an hour just telling those stories and how meaningful they've been, but at least to highlight things that might be shareable for us in ministry. Yes, ma'am.
Unconditional love.
Unconditional love.
She took mine.
It was yours.
It was mine.
Great. Unconditional love. Yeah.
Model healthy boundaries.
Model healthy boundaries.
Spend time with me.
Spent time.
Great listener.
Listener.
Vulnerable authenticity.
Vulnerable authenticity. Authentic.
Could tell them anything.
Could tell them anything. Trusting and
Inviting.
inviting.
Compassionate.
Compassionate.
Non-judgmental.
Non-judgmental.
Deeply prayerful.
deeply prayerful. Be like 2 more.
Like, they didn't force it on you.
Yeah.
Try to shove it down.
Honored your freedom to enforce it.
I have written down what she said, but but I should have written something else. I can only think of 2 really big people that have impacted my life in a big way. And I think that they had high expectations for the
Ooh, good one. High
They did have
expectations.
high expectations.
I like that.
Set the bar.
Yeah.
A great teacher.
Great teacher.
Conviction.
Conviction. Amen.
Along with hers, they challenge us to be our better selves.
Yeah, thank you.
Example?
Good example.
Presence.
Presence, what do you mean?
That they were present. They didn't have to go and do stuff. Be present.
Yeah, great.
Engaging.
Engaging. Beautiful. A good like ID card list or job description list, right? For ministries at our parish, maybe. Pope Francis, as a part of the Synod process, had a period of preparation before the Synod, the actual month-long Synod meeting that I was at, and then implementation for the meetings and documents. By now, you should have had this document. Has that made it around to everyone? If not, it's stuck on the tables. But keep passing that around to all the ministries. But it's coming if it's not to you yet. In the pre-Synod meeting, Pope Francis invited 300 young people to Rome to talk about the Synod before it happened in this theme. And they produced a little document, which is quite beautiful. And there are actually a couple Americans that were instrumental in this particular section of writing. But in this pre-Synod meeting, Pope Francis actually quotes this whole section in his post-synodal papal exhortation, Christ is alive, which is pretty meaningful to raise up the voices of young people into this magisterial document. This is on the back, with the heading from the pre-Synod meeting of young people, where young people themselves articulate these qualities of a mentor. You can see in the bullet, I pulled them out as bullets. Qualities of a mentor include a faithful Christian who engages with the church and the world, someone who constantly seeks holiness, who is a confidant without judgment, who actively listens and responds, who is deeply loving, self-aware, recognizes their limits, who knows the joys and sorrows of the spiritual life. And that next paragraph, who has an acknowledgement of their own humanity. They're human beings who make mistakes, not perfect people, but forgiving sinners. In the next paragraph, mentors leading people not as passive followers, but walk alongside them, allowing them to be active participants on the journey, respecting the freedom that comes with the process of discernment, believing wholeheartedly in that person's ability to participate in life in the church, to nurture seeds of faith, without expecting to see immediate results or fruits, which includes everyone, priests, religious, and laity, and that all mentors should benefit from being well-formed and engage in ongoing formation themselves. So many of the same things that you named, right? But I think also a beautiful list for us to sort of, as we describe one who accompanies, an accompanier, a mentor, that these are some of those qualities. I think if we're honest with ourselves, we would probably say that in many cases, people who are in leadership roles in parishes, whether as staff or volunteers, don't as fully present or represent these qualities as we might hope. I think part of that is because in the American Catholic Church especially, we have a very programmatic model or mindset of ministerial leadership, where we are very task-oriented and task-based, and so we don't include mentorship or accompaniment as parts of the job description for volunteer ministry roles. So the man or woman who runs the food bank is there to run the food bank, and Father needs to find someone who can run the food bank and keep it stocked, right? And that's a good thing. But what if the ministry to the homeless and that food bank, if that leader saw him or herself as accompanying those people, yet alone the other volunteers? I think this is a culture shift that we have to make in very slow and ordinary ways to develop this virtue of accompaniment in parish life. And I want to sort of break open how we might do that in parishes. I'm working with a parish in Washington, D.C. to try to implement this, because there aren't, again, there's no program to like do it. There is a resource that I should mention, and some of you maybe last night met Father Frank Donio from the Catholic Apostolate Center, also in D.C. But they published this book called The Art of Accompaniment just this past month. It's called The Art of Accompaniment from the Catholic Apostolate Center, based in D.C. A couple friends, actually 2 ECHO alumni, for those of you familiar with the ECHO program, which I myself am an alumnus of, were the authors of it. People who have worked in parish life and catechesis. But I want to try to push through to these accompanying relationships and how we make it practical or real. Because all of this is a nice idea, I'm sure we should be friendlier or do all this stuff, but what do we actually do? And so I'm going to propose a couple things and then answer some of the questions that you had. So in working with a parish, these are sort of the 5 steps of parish renewal that I'm working on in collaboration with a particular pastor in DC. So the first is, I think it takes, again, based upon the knowledge that spiritual accompaniment does not happen accidentally, it happens intentionally. With people who've received formation and training, with people who are aware of what they're called to do. The first task, I think, is that there needs to be a commitment of leadership to model this. One, to believe in this methodology of spiritual accompaniment, but to model it. So my question to the Synod Fathers, how much time do you spend accompanying people? Father over there in the corner knows, as vicar for clergy, that there is a new Ratio Fundamentalis coming out on clergy life. That's the document that sort of teaches or tells seminaries how to form priests. And there is going to be included, from what I understand, a renewed priority of priest as one who accompanies and cultivating that ministry of accompaniment. But having worked in a number of different parishes and now working at a diocese, I don't observe a lot of priests or staff whose leadership model is to accompany their staff. I worked in one parish for 2 years where we never had a staff meeting in 2 years with a pastor, which is his prerogative as pastor. But we see the limitations there, right? You have staff then whose expectation is not to accompany because they've never received that. They've never felt that, maybe. So what I would propose, and have proposed in this parish, and this one priest, I'll tell you what he's doing, is I said, Father, I think you have to model this. And so he's made himself available to every head of ministry to meet with him this fall for a 15 or 20-minute check-in, just on their ministry and how they're walking with people in their journey. I came out and spoke to all the Catholic school teachers on a similar talk, spoke to 50 hand-picked leaders who are involved in ministry, and just spoke to about 150 2 weeks ago, reinforcing the same theme of of spiritual accompaniment. This is who we are as a parish, this is who we're going to do. And the pastor is sort of stepping up to the plate to say, okay, I'm going to clear my schedule and commit a certain number of hours a week to meeting with my leaders. If you're aware of the Amazing Parish initiative or sort of some of these contemporary leadership programs in parishes, it starts with a clarity of vision and reinforcing that clarity. This is a lot of that comes from Pat Lencioni, the leadership consultant who's connected to that ministry. But it takes reinforcing clarity around who we are, how we behave, and what we do. And so to build this culture of walking with people, sure, any one of you, and in the sphere of influence you have in the parish, can and should begin modeling this culture of spiritual accompaniment, as well as in your own family lives and communities. But for our parish renewal, it starts with the leadership at the top. Not to buy a new program, not to do something, but to set aside time. To be willing to meet one-on-one, to be willing to pray together, to check in, that I see is often a missing step in renewing this culture of spiritual accompaniment and growth. Alongside that, I should add, the first, commitment to leadership. The second is an honest assessment of our ministry and how we spend our time. I think we do a pretty poor job in parish life, and this is true of parishes and general staffs, but also volunteer teams. I think we do a pretty poor job of assessment. And the challenge is the spiritual life is not cleanly measurable. But while it's not quantifiable, because of grace is not quantifiable, the analogy I like to use is we do have different flashlights to shine into the room. That when we go into a darkened room, we can't observe everything. But we can shine light in certain areas. to better understand and see what's in that room. And so there are certain metrics that are important. So we can look at October head counts, or how many people are coming to Mass. We can look at what percentage of our adults in our parish are actually involved. One crisis that I should have mentioned at the keynote is we know two things. One, that we have about the 90-10 rule. 10% of people in the parish do 90% of the work. Does that resonate with you? That's pretty commonly sort of held, and a lot of that is similar to financial giving, that about 10% of the parish end up giving larger, outmatching that, outpacing themselves in terms of financial giving, because there's such a large pool of people who don't volunteer, who aren't involved, actively engaged in any way. So we know we have this 10% of people who are pretty maxed, right? Like my guess is, how many of you are involved in more than one ministry in a parish? Right. So we know we have a small pool of folks who are asked to do quite a bit. And on top of that, that pool of folks in most cases is aging. And so the millennial generation is not filling in to volunteer, to participate in Mass, to send kids to Catholic school, to join the Knights of Columbus, whatever area you want to look at. A younger generation is not filling in at the same rate as the largest generation, the boomers, is transitioning. Trying to step aside, to retiring, moving in different places. And so there's going to be a compression in ordinary parish life, where we can't do all of the things we've been doing. So you talk about complacency. Complacency will be broke first, because it simply will not be possible. Now the question for me, having worked with young adults for a long time, is, are we willing to forge intergenerational relationships of accompaniment that allow for the wisdom of elders in our community to be passed along? Because one of two things is going to happen, speaking of this generational difference. Either folks in their 70s and 80s who are leading many ministries in our parishes will retire or step aside or no longer be able to do those ministries, and they'll just drop. Or those people will form an alliance with those younger than them, maybe in their 40s or 50s or 30s or 20s, and be willing to do something different. I spoke at one parish council at a church in DC, and a woman said, "How do I get those young adults in my synodality?" I said, well, that's the wrong question to ask. If they wanted to be in it, they probably would be, but they don't. And so it takes reimagining. Okay, what's the vision of this ministry? To reach women and help them grow in their faith life. Okay, what are other ways that's being done? What are ways that synodality group could take on new efforts and initiatives to be willing to walk together in that journey? Pope Francis, in a homily to priests of Italy, to the Italian Bishops' Conference, I believe, gave this lovely analogy of accompaniment where sometimes the one who accompanies walks ahead to lead and guide the way. Sometimes the person walks behind to nudge and encourage along. And sometimes the person walks side by side. And I think we need a lot of that side by side mentorship and accompaniment in our parish life, to be willing to be open to new ideas, as Pope Francis says repeatedly, to let go of the phrase, "it's always been done this way." I think in our American church, we will have to stop doing that, because at some point we won't be able to do it. I mean, look at the Northeast. I'm not sure what the realities are in Indiana, but Pittsburgh, Boston, Baltimore, Brooklyn, shuttering parishes. They cannot keep the physical. There's not going to be complacency because they can't do it anymore. It's not possible. But how do we be ahead of the curve to cultivate this intergenerational handoff, right? And I think part of that challenge is, as we work with volunteers and staff, are we really being honest with ourselves and our assessments? Do we have an annual evaluation of our ministries? Do you have an annual evaluation in your role, whether you're a professional staff or a volunteer? Do you have a job description by which you know that you're being successful? Is this an opportunity maybe to meet with the pastoral leadership team and to map out what a job description is that could include and weave in this, in practical and measurable ways, this process of spiritual accompaniment? That we're being permissioned to do this one-on-one or small community accompaniment in ordinary life. So one, commitment of leadership to model. Two, to be honest in our assessment of how we spend our time. Three, I think we have to look differently at how we do events and programs. I think we need to shift from programs to people. Because programs exist for people, not people for programs. And too often in diocesan life and in parish life, we switch that priority around. So we create a program, or we've inherited a program, and then what we do is we put on our sales job, and we say, we need to get people to that program, because we want to keep the program alive. As opposed to saying, how can this program best serve people? And is it serving people? is it helping to form missionary disciples. And that might mean being willing to not be complacent and set something aside for a season, set something aside for a year, or to reimagine it, to say, how are we going to do this differently? So if there's an annual day of our parish Lenten or Advent day of reflection, that could be, maybe the numbers have gone down. You could discern we're going to not do it this year, or we're going to make sure that all of our heads of ministries personally invite 5 people to come to this Advent day, and that they're going to commit to go to the day themselves. So we're going to model accompaniment and be present with them. And then following that, we're going to help meet one-on-one with the people who came. Maybe the leaders of the day or the priest is going to follow up individually with the participants, asking, what was your experience? Does it make you think any differently? Is there a way we can help you grow in your faith life? That would be a way to take an existing program and to infuse it with this culture of one-on-one accompaniment, to bear probably fruits and new ideas and engage new people. When we do event planning or program planning, I think we have to even create worksheets for ourselves in terms of our project plans around when we're hosting any event, what are we doing before, during, and after to accompany people? We often spend so much time focusing on the during, what we're doing, that we forget. Even diocesan conferences like this, I run them, I make the same pitfalls because we're so busy and there's only so much time. But are we personally inviting people to the programs that we have ahead of time? When we're there, are we really being intentional about offering hospitality? Not just someone at the door to say hello, but really people who themselves are available simply to befriend people, to get to know them, to be welcome in friendship. We host Theology on Tap in DC, like many places do, and we really try to be intentional that at Theology on Tap we have a couple people at the door greeting folks, which is normal and good and great, but also to have a couple people floating. Because if someone's sitting at the bar like this on their phone, they are lonely. They're not distracted. They feel social anxiety and don't want to feel alone by themselves. And so they're finding a way to feel more comfortable, right? How do we break through that? By having folks who are intentional about not having any other job but being present with people during an event. And then how are we following up after the event? I mean, so often we get to the end of something, whether it's a parish bazaar or a retreat or whatever, and we're so tired from doing all the things and cleaning up and on to the next thing, we forget that we have to continue to build those relationships. And so people talk about service and justice as 2 feet. Have you heard that? That move together in Catholic social teaching. I think programs and personal accompaniment are like 2 feet. That we host a program to gather people so that we can follow up personally and deepen those relationships and help them to grow. And then we host another program to help them to gather more people so that we can help them to grow. So if we can shift a programmatic mindset into an interpersonal mindset by being intentional about how we invite, how we offer hospitality and relationships during an event, and how we individually follow up, I think we'll see the beginning of that culture change and transformation in ordinary parish life. The fourth is the transformation of small groupings of parish life to be small communities. I'm a big believer in small groups, of small group ministry. We see successes of this in the Catholic world, certainly widespread in the Protestant world, of forming small groups. The challenge that we have as Roman Catholics is we have a Sunday obligation to liturgy that our Protestant brothers and sisters don't. And so a Protestant community making a commitment to a weekly small group, or their family making a commitment, can be really doable because that's their weekend, that's their week's commitment to the Lord, right? Many families, myself included, with a 9-month-old, aren't able, because of different volunteer works we have, to join small groups. So the answer cannot be only to have a parish small group program, though I think we probably need parish small group programs. I think what we should start with is the transformation of existing small groupings that we already have in parish life. And so most parishes probably have a parish council made up of a small group of people, a finance council made up of a small group of people. We probably have leadership teams for Knights of Columbus, men's or women's organizations, maybe retreat planning teams, maybe a service or advocacy group, or Stephen ministry, serving those people recovering from they're dealing with loss. Maybe we have a St. Vincent de Paul Society who visit people one-on-one in that ministry of accompaniment, but we have a leadership team of that. We have catechists, a group of catechists in the parish, teachers at a Catholic school, parish staff, RCIA. We have all these small groupings of parish life, but we don't treat any of them like small groups. And so we gather in the right kind of way. Even, the ladies who play, mahjong at noon, or the cards group, or whatever groupings we have. We have lots of of small groupings in parish life, but we don't leverage personal relationships. We treat them much more as functionary groups. But imagine, if you imagine a big circle with all these smaller circles within it, if all those small circles of parish life functioned more like small communities where people prayed together, prayed for their intentions together, knew each other's names, knew what was going on in each other's lives, encouraged each other in the spiritual life, were really accompanying one another, a whole group of leaders in a parish would be covered in terms of spiritual company. We'd be able to reach and nurture people's lives of faith. But instead, first off, at a leadership level, there's probably no one managing that to really make sure that heads of ministries are running the choir differently, right? The choir is a great small group. But does the choir director see him or herself as accompanying those 5 or 10 people? If we can shift that piece of culture, if we can form our ministry leaders to invest in the lives of others with some very practical skills. It's every year we do a day of reflection together as leaders. We pray out loud and share personal intentions every week when we meet. Maybe there's a parish-wide prayer or process like Lectio Divina, the Sunday Gospel. It creates the spaces in which we can know, hey, where's Sam been? I haven't seen him in a while. And maybe you remember that someone who was struggling with sight isn't there. Or someone shares for the first time, my mom just got a diagnosis of cancer. And then a small community forms to support that person, to follow up, to help someone feel known. But if instead we don't create space for that and really carve out, protect space within the existent programs and ministries we have, I think we miss that opportunity. And we miss an opportunity to form leaders in life of our parish to carry that forward in their own communities and families. So I think we have to transform the small groupings of parish life to be places where people are accompanied, which starts with that leadership formation and expectation. Then I think as a parish, it's easier to see where are there some missing points. Maybe we need to have a young parents group because we see that that's a missing point. So we need to start a small group for young families or for young adults, or transform a youth ministry model from a Sunday night youth group night where 50 people come, which is an impossible model to accompany people, to one where we recognize, altar servers and Boy Scouts and CYO coaches and the youth minister are all accompanying young people in different ways, right? Maybe the youth minister's job needs to be mentoring CYO coaches and Boy Scout leaders to help them walk with young people in their life, not just running a once-a-week youth group night or leading an annual trip to Steubenville. What are we doing to follow up from that trip to Steubenville? What are we doing to follow up from NCYC? To share that experience, but then empower young people to be more involved. So 4 is to transform those small groupings. And then the 5th is probably the most important, which is we begin with ourselves to make a personal commitment to one person. So often what I say is this Sunday, tomorrow, introduce yourself to one person who you don't know. Because often with that 10% of people who do 90% of the work, which is you're the 10%, right? The people you don't know are the 90%. When I was a parishioner at my former parish in DC, for 3 weeks they announced that there was going to be this fundraising $10 breakfast at the school for a good cause, and everyone was invited. They made this, it's one of those parishes that 15 minutes announcements, and I'm kill myself, come on. And so every week they made this announcement. So that Sunday came, I was there, and I looked around the church as a 26-year-old. I didn't know a lot of people. I was working for the Archdiocese. I was committed, you could say. I worked for the church. I looked around, I didn't know anyone that Sunday that I recognized. So I lingered for a minute after they made the announcement after Mass, and I sort of stood there, and I just decided, no, I'm just going to go home. If one person, not a 26-year-old, if an 86-year-old would have come up to me and said, I don't think I recognize you, what's your name? Are you going over to the breakfast? 100% I would have gone. The greatest power we have to re-evangelize young people and young families are elders in our community who too often think that they don't have anything to say to a younger person. It's simply not true. Young people are hungry for intergenerational relationships. And we have the power to unlock that when we create families within the context of our parishes, spiritual families. The parish, as Pope Francis said, is a family of families. So I think the 5th point is simply to make a commitment to get to know one person. That if the parish council or a core team of 10 leaders in the parish made that commitment every Sunday for a month even, to meet one person and to follow up with them, there might be 40 or 50 people who knew someone like the church, who was able to be followed up with, who had a question that got answered, and to invite them back next Sunday, to get to know them. When I worked at the DRE in California, as a young idiot 20-something, I had the benefit of getting to know all these families in religious ed. And I didn't know very many people in the city, and so I would often spend time in people's homes, meeting families there who were catechists, being invited to their dinner tables, and I felt like I had a real family in that parish. Lots of aunts and uncles with lots of opinions, and lots of grandparents and great aunts and uncles with lots of opinions, but it was a real blessing. And that is a pretty unique experience, I realized, that I kind of got this special experience because I was there and worked all the time. If you only come to church once every other week or once a month, if you're on this fence, if you're kind of drifting slowly away from the church, it's personal accompaniment invitation that's going to help that person take one step back in. The good news of the sad story of disaffiliation is that people, especially young people, don't jump away from the church with one big leap. They slowly drift away, experience after negative experience, anonymity after anonymity of just feeling like they don't belong, but they don't know anyone, which means we have the benefit, like something drifting off into the water, to pull them back slowly, person by person, positive relationship by positive relationship. And so, in the same spirit of get out the boat, you have to get out the accompaniment. Every boat matters, every accompaniment matters, right? We don't know how meaningful that conversation is in the life of each person. So those are 5 little steps to parish renewal. At a personal level, there was a resource from my home Archdiocese in Kansas City that I really liked, where they talk about spiritual accompaniment in terms of our own personal plan. But before I jump into that, maybe I should pause and see if people had any questions or thoughts around that parish experience or ideas of accompaniment within the context of parish life. Yeah.
So I think that great, marvelous ideas, and in reality, probably most of us would do that, and we would hope to get a 30% result.
Yeah.
Right? One of the things I wanted to add was that before you jump into that, if you with faith ask the Lord to send the Holy Spirit to you, to give you the words, to give them the words, to open both of your ears, and to ask for that guidance. That if you start off that encounter with a simple question of tell me what's going on with you, or anything like that, and you listen, that you'll find the Holy Spirit will guide you and give you those words to say. And on the theme of accompaniment, I keep coming back to today, since you've been talking about the Simon of Cyrene, and you have Jesus carrying his cross up the hill to salvation of all mankind, but his human body is limited to the frailty of a torture that is unbelievable, and he can't complete that mission without the accompaniment of Simon, who went into it not really wanting to at first, a little bit afraid, but by the end of it, he was with Christ, and he helped him carry that cross. And something you have to understand is, if you want to do that true accompaniment, you're going to get bloody and muddy. You're going to have their problems will weigh on you. You're going to help carry their cross. And Jesus asks us all to carry our cross, right? And he gives us the example that even he couldn't carry his cross all the way without help of someone that could accompany him. And so that's what we have to do. We get in and get our hands dirty and help them carry the cross.
It's a beautiful example. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Other questions or thoughts? Yes.
I just kind of had a comment that really just echoes everything that you said. And that's just to look at it in perspective of like the 90% who aren't doing much or anything in the parish. From that angle, sometimes it looks like the 10% who are very involved and take care of all the ministries and all that. It can be very intimidating to see that group of people who are very plugged in, seem to know each other, and have been in the parish for a long time. Like, as somebody who's not involved, you can think, who am I? Like, who am I to step up or offer to do this? It kind of seems like kind of cliquey at some parishes. And so, to your point, like the effort of the people who are very connected to kind of get outside of the bubble and connect with, even like you said, one person who's not there, and really getting to know people and know their strengths. So when there becomes a need, be like, I know you and I know what your strengths are, and like the personal invitation. I think you'd be great at this. And then there's, like, that feels good for people to know you. And be like, I know you and I think you'd be good at this. Like, that feels good and you want to say yes. So there's also that, but that takes an effort to get to know people. And, because if it's like, there's a need for something, and an email goes out. We're looking for people to help with this. Like, how many people really step up? But if somebody calls you and says, hey, like, I'm looking for somebody to help me with this. Could you so-and-so, will you come? Are you available? Like, I bet you they would say yes.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my favorite books in ministry called Growing and Engaged Church. Any of you familiar with that text? Written by Alfred Winsman, something like that. Growing and Engaged Church. So, but they talk about just that, and I actually worked with this one pastor about that idea of engagement, the involvement. We ended up using a spiritual accompaniment language, but the principles are very similar. That we know we have this problem or challenge of this 90%, how we reach them. Often it's by allowing them to participate in the life and the mission of the church in some appropriate way. And then too often instead we put this blanket invitation out, or this like desperate cry like, we need a 3rd grade catechist, can you do it? We don't ask, do you have the skills to do it? Do you have the desire to do it? And so this engagement process is really, it's a great book or lens to look at. One of the things they say to me is start helping people identify their gifts. And so there's another resource that we use for our formation of young adult leaders called Living Your Strengths, which a lot of companies use, many people have done. I'm seeing nods. But it can be a great little tool of, it's, identifying what are some top 5 strengths. At a parish in San Francisco, they did that pretty actively, and then help people to plug into parish ministries as a result of that. But one, people love growing self-awareness and their own giftedness, because, again, I'm shocked at how many people struggle with anxiety, depression, self-doubt, that we can often think, oh, it's just puffing people up and making them think it's all about them. That's not been my experience in working with people, that when we help people recognize their own giftedness, that's what we're doing. I rather feel as though we're helping restore human dignity to people who don't feel worthy a lot. And so I think it's a great opportunity, a great tool to have built in for leadership programs or things, opportunities to help people identify their gifts. They also say a great tool or resource can be the parish registration process. And I actually want to highlight 6 easy starting points within parishes, and one of them is the parish registration process. So Growing and Engaged Church talks about that people put the effort in that you require of them, that people generally will meet expectations. And so if you go to Walgreens or CVS and just type in your phone number to be on their list, you never think about it, it doesn't matter. But if there's a leadership program you have to apply to, you kind of put the extra effort in because you're interested. And the same should be true of our parishes, that while anyone can come to Mass, and to be a parishioner requires some sharing of expectations. And that parishes have had a lot of success in laying out what the expectations are for parishioners. And so having them sign like a parish covenant or something that shares that, hey, here's what we expect, that you volunteer in the parish, that you come to Mass regularly, that you that you're part of a small community, that you tithe, and we promise to provide opportunities for your growth, for beautiful prayer experience, that we're always available for the sacraments or any needs you have. But just clarifying that expectation puts in the minds of people, this is serious. Something is asked of me here. It's not like my CVS card that I never think about, right? So I do think that's a great opportunity. The new parishioner registration is an easy way where people are constantly coming to us. When I registered my parish in DC, I got a letter 2 weeks later asking me to give money to the school. That was my first contact with the parish. Right? There's a 76-year-old Monsignor who's nearing retirement age, who a year ago had this revelation based upon a young adult staffer. He said, Jonathan, this young adult encouraged me. He's downtown DC. Most people who join the parish are young adult women, almost all young adults. He said, she had this idea that I should meet individually for coffee the people who register. But I figured no one would be interested, but 7 out of 10 take me up on it. So I loaded up a Starbucks gift card, and I meet people for coffee, and they meet, the shortest I met with them was an hour. I was like, yeah, senior, like this makes perfect sense. Young adults want to meet with their priests. They want to get to know people. They want to be involved. They're looking for mentorship. But a part of my heart broke. This Monsignor in a very important parish was just realizing the importance of this ministry of accompaniment in a practical way. And just for the first time, maybe in a while, making a commitment to block off his calendar to meet with people one-on-one. But beautiful that he's taken that step and was sharing it with other priests, right? Whether it's a priest or a lay person, dignifying that parish registration process as a moment of accompaniment, I think has great potential to connect people. And a lot of parishes, some pastors, I'll say, in DC get sort of upset with the Protestant churches who people leave the Catholic Church and go to the Protestant churches. I don't know if that happens anywhere else. But sometimes our priests, bless their hearts, and they're wonderful, think that people are going because they want to be entertained, because they have music and screens and all this stuff. And again, I've just not met that person who goes for that reason. What I have observed is my cousin and her husband, both raised Catholic, one of whom got involved in a church because she was personally invited to a small group Bible study, and for the first time was presented with the charisma of Jesus Christ as someone who is her Savior, and now has left the church and is very active in her Protestant church. The other, her husband, who is a nurse, was personally mentored by someone he worked with and was involved in the church, and for years sort of walked with him on this journey, and as he was sort of practicing no Christian faith, brought him into personal accompaniment. So I do observe a lot of Protestant communities not, putting sparklers in the pews, but instead, when you walk in, connecting you to someone with what are called like affinity groups, someone you have a connection to. And so not just saying, hello, welcome to St. Margaret's, hello, welcome to St. Margaret's, but like, oh, I met you, what's your name? Oh, your kids go to Mount Carmel. Have you met Sandra and Bob? Their kids go there too. And having those people you can connect people to with an expectation there's going to be a follow-up. Or, oh, you're interested in being a lector. Let me connect you to this person who doesn't just email you and say, I'll add you to the list, or there's no spots full for 6 months. Right? But actually, hey, let's meet, let's talk with you. What's your experience been? That we can humanize all these interactions. And I think new parishioner registration is one great place to start. A second, I think, is marriage prep and weddings. Having mentor couples. There's a great book called Witness to Love that encourages the marriage prep process to have a mentor couple, each couple getting married. But I think too, and you so nicely shared your witness, I always say kind of exactly what you said. I was very happy and encouraged. We can't just walk people up to the threshold or the starting line, as you said, of a sacramental experience. We have to walk with them through it. So again, anecdotally, people say that about half the people in RCIA aren't present 2 years later. I would encourage you, if you know the parish secretary or connected, to actually look at the data. Again, this is one area where we can measure. We can look at assuming that RCA folks get registered, which they should. Are they still giving financially? Are they still actively involved in some volunteer work? There's a Protestant woman who converted in DC, very active. And after went to RCA, she said to the RCA leader, oh, after Easter, after the mystical period, Easter this season, what do we do now? And the leader just said, you just go to church. And she was like, are you kidding me? For a year, she'd experienced what? A mentorship experience of accompaniment in a small community with her sponsor. And after that year, was told, just jump into the big ship where no one knows you and you don't know anyone else. Do you see how that can be so disheartening? In fact, that our sacramental preparation for baptism and confirmation of children and adults, we prioritize spiritual accompaniment so much that you can't get a kid baptized unless you have what? Godparents, right? You can't be confirmed unless you have what? It's as though we've forgotten about these key RCIA realities in parish life, right? That it's ongoing re-evangelization of adults. We need those sponsored godparent relationships in our lives, those accompaniers, to walk with us. I think someone asked the question about how to work with RCA sponsors, I think that's a key need. To involve in the process, to meet with them one-on-one. I think there are some very practical things that could be helpful. But I think that marriage preparation, baptism preparation, and confirmation are 3 more easy entry points for spiritual accompaniment, because you got those relationships already in place, where you've got godparents or sponsors, and to work with that person. And so how much time are we investing working with those sponsors? Or if their sponsor is a relative, because that's maybe a meaningful family experience but lives far away, is there value maybe in having a pseudo-parish sponsor? That's not the official one, but someone who's actually going to be nearby. Because we kind of set ourselves up for failure, given that that model is not envisioned for a world where I have a godchild in California and in Kansas City and in Philadelphia. What am I supposed to do, right? I'm probably a crappy sponsor, to be honest, or godparent. But maybe we need to have other interventions to recognize the reality and landscape of these important accompanying relationships and find another person, not to replace their family member that might be important to them, but to be that bridge or connection point to them in the life of the parish. The last area in these sort of big 6 ministries is funerals. Funerals can be a beautiful moment of accompaniment of a family, whether it's through a ministry like Stephen's ministry that follows up with a family grieving a loss. This one pastor I'm working with makes the commitment to meet with every funeral family personally, to follow up with the notes after the funeral, and to invite them in November to an annual mass where all those loved ones who have had family members pass come together for a meal and to celebrate that loved one. Very simple, very doable, but a real meaningful experience of accompaniment for that family, who may be tempted to drift when that key figure in their life, who was Catholic, may have drifted away. So there are a lot of, I think, easy touch points within parish ministry to cultivate these relationships of accompaniment. And then finally with ourselves. The Archdiocese of Kansas City has a great little document on their website where they use the methodology of Jesus around our personal plan for accompaniment. So I kind of want to lead with this, and then maybe have some discussion. They talk about the 3, the 12, and the 72. That Jesus gathered in these 3 types of groups. He called Peter, James, and John to key moments like the Transfiguration and others. He called the 12, and then he sent out the 72. And so in our own lives, who are our 3? Who are the people you're called to have close, intimate relationships with? Jesus walked with Peter, James, and John in a uniquely deep way, more so than some of the other apostles, as he pulled them aside for those relationships. Who are those people in your lives already? They probably don't exist in Puerto Rico or in the Bahamas. They probably exist in your homes, in your neighborhoods, in your parishes already, in your workplaces. Who are those 3 you feel called, that God has placed on your heart as you pray over those names to accompany? Then what's your 12? Jesus had this a little bit bigger group of people who he still was in regular contact and regular relationship with. Maybe this is your ministry grouping in a parish, or a small group, or a book club. How are we involved in the lives of a small group of people? Maybe with a little bit less everyday or weekly depth than we do with those 3. But what are those small groups that we're a part of, that nourish us, but also that we're pouring ourselves into with this pure ministry? And then finally, the 72 is sort of that mission ad gentes, the mission to the world. How are we present in presenting ourselves to those in need? So how are we present in our workplaces? How do people perceive us? How do we present ourselves on social media? Do we shed light or do we shed heat in those situations, right? People don't remember what you say, they remember how you make them feel. I'm often aware of that sometimes I get in quick go mode trying to get a lot of stuff done in the office and realize I walk past people and people say, oh, you're walking really fast. And I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I was walking fast. But I obviously made those people feel like I didn't have time for them. I've got something important to do, right? And so how are we just attentive to how we're present to those broader relationships in our lives? So I found that maybe like a helpful little guide of who's our 3, who's our 12, and who are our 72, in terms of helping us to identify our own ministries of accompaniment. I want to answer the question of how to build community within multilingual communities or multiple groups. I think it starts with shared experience, and it's very challenging in parishes because there's basically the 5 p.m. vigil parish and the 8 a.m. Sunday morning parish, and the 11 o'clock parish, and the Spanish Mass parish, right? That we need opportunities to come together, and so I think that takes some creative pastoral planning and intentionality, whether it's an annual parish mission, to give opportunities for each of those different cultural communities, in this case, of different language groups, to offer something for the whole parish, to celebrate popular feasts and devotions. I think it's a great way to celebrate popular piety and to share the giftedness of different cultural communities with those in the Anglo-White Church that have largely lost a lot of those particular European devotions or practices of faith, to celebrate those alongside, to revive our own cultural expressions of faith, and to learn others as well. And so I've seen parishes be really successful celebrating feast days, celebrating Our Lady of Guadalupe, celebrating the Saints Ruiz in the Filipino community. There are many, obviously, devotions, you can't name all of them, but to give people space at the table for that, space in the Mass, in the bulletin, places people to come together, using communication tools like Flocknote as just a way of keeping people in the loop. For the pastor to have a weekly text message or email that goes out to everybody on the same page that maybe highlights different parts of the community so the whole community is getting the same message. I think some of those types of things are important to help build a sense of one church. Any other questions or comments people have as we're talking together, or that stirred in your mind? My hope is that you leave feeling as though spiritual accompaniment is something that's doable within whatever sphere of influence you have. And that could be bringing your neighbor a pie this November and caring for them. Or it could be talking to your pastor about more serious formation of leaders within the ministry group you have within the parish staff. Or it's tomorrow introducing yourself to one new person and discerning maybe that family member you need to call more regularly than maybe you have. It need not be some master program or plan.
Could I pick your brain for confirmation preparation to be able to do the curriculum, but also utilize the gifts and talents of high school team members who are in there, who have been confirmed, to utilize them as a team to accompany the ones who don't really want to break out? Lexio has been great, but then how do we continue that to utilize high school accompaniment inside, so seniors to freshmen?
Yeah, I think developing mentor programs or a small group model where the confirmandi gather, so that you can assign one young person, one teenager alongside a catechist for each of those groups and clarify a job description of what they're going to do. Maybe it's giving a witness talk, sharing how they're involved in the parish, leading part of the discussion. I think, but formalizing those relationships. I think you're saying the right things of involving them in a practical way. But I've seen a lot of success with programs that utilize a small group model more than behind a classroom desk model.
They want to get away from that, but then it's also in that freedom.
Yeah, it takes more planning work.
But the job description helps formalize it and gives clarity.
Right. And even for catechists, following up with their young people's families. Like, to know the names of parents, not just for drop off and pick up, but because you know what's going on in their lives, and actually the catechist is supporting the parents' work of catechizing their child, not the other way around. Moving to when I was at DRE, I brought families together for whole family catechesis nights. We did one for All Saints, we did one during Advent, we did one during Lent. And going back to some real basics with formation, so like at the Advent one, we got a bunch of greenery together and families made their own Advent wreaths. Because I realized you don't already have that stuff lying around. You don't have them. Younger families don't have those traditions built in always, and so let's help them cultivate those family traditions and practices of faith at home.
Some time ago, we had a call out for mentors for our 8th grade students in our school. And I was one of those mentors. And I still think of the person that I mentored. And I no longer have an address for her, but she's gone off into higher education and maybe a job. Maybe she's even getting married now. It's, all of those kind of things. And I remember, like during Lent, finding some little mementos or something, thinking Jesus' suffering, it was Jesus carrying his cross, and it was something like that. And I found it at the dollar store of all places. But, you know, it was affordable and it said the right thing. And so she had a part of me too.
Yeah.
So it was very nice. We no longer do this, but
And I wonder if
it
you
was
could,
something in the past.
I wonder if you would write a note and share with the parish secretary if she might be willing to mail it to their parents, who might be able to pass it along or something. I mean, that'd be
Well, I
interesting.
might be able to find the name in our directory or
Yeah.
something. But,
I think parish secretaries are like the key to this ministry, right? It's the difference between, would like to get married here, are you registered? And congratulations, tell me about your husband or wife, when did you get engaged? Right? Sometimes, and you can see on the handout that I gave, little 4 tips of accompaniment on the back. One is to start close, not far. I kind of talked about that, who you are, knowing your life. Start small, not large. And it's even okay to start with basic human needs. We talk about mentorship is spiritual, which is true, but I'm a new dad who just bought a house for the first time this summer. I've got an overgrown lawn and I'm trying to do some construction projects. I would love a middle-aged retired dad or husband to help me out and to come by and just to be a part of my life and mentor me in that way, right? Like, that's meaningful, and it probably sets me up on a road to build those closer relationships. But we shouldn't think that just because it's not about prayer life, it's not really accompaniment. That human formation is an important part of it. The third is to go deep, not wide, starting with ourselves, but also with other people. And then to go long, not short. That be patient, be in it for the long haul. I think that's a beautiful example you just shared. The 8th grader, maybe being able to follow back up, even a little ways, and let her know that I'm praying for you every day, this Advent. You know, like that would touch someone's heart in a positive way, right?
I think too, we just have to remember that the Holy Spirit's involved in all of our lives. I was called to ministry years ago, like 1 month after my son was killed in a car accident. I was asked by our parish pastor to head up youth ministry for the very kids that he went to high school with. And I thought, what is wrong with you? Why would you ask this of me? Is the Holy Spirit stinking nuts to ask that of me at that time? Yes, he is.
Holy Spirit's crazy.
Yes. I mean, why would he ask somebody who is in deep grief and, you know, totally unequipped? I'm an interior designer. I'm not a catechist.
Right.
But I became a master catechist with the Diocese of Lafayette through the process. But, you know, I think sometimes we just have to roll with it. We just have to be brave, kick in fortitude, and just be brave and say, okay, God, you're asking this of me, so I'm just going to do it. And he seems to equip. He equips us to do what needs to be done. And I think we just have to use the virtue of courage, do it.
Absolutely.
And just forge ahead.
Absolutely.
And be grateful for God's attention.
Yeah.
He's paying attention to you.
I'll close with one final quote, as I did before. This is from Christus Vivit, Pope Francis. It speaks that boldness and trust in the Holy Spirit. Francis says, "We're always struck by the strength of the young Mary's yes. The strength in these words, 'Be it done,' that she spoke to the angel. This was no merely passive or resigned acceptance, or a faint yes, as if to say, well, let's give it a try and see what happens. Mary did not know the words, let's see what happens. She was determined. She knew what was at stake, and she said yes without thinking twice. Hers was a yes of someone prepared to be committed, someone willing to take a risk, ready to stake everything she had, with no more security than the certainty of knowing she was the bearer of a promise." And then Pope Francis says, "So I ask each one of you, do you see yourselves as the bearer of a promise? What promise is present in my heart that I can take up?" Mary's mission would undoubtedly be difficult, but the challenges that lay ahead were no reason to say no. That trusting the Holy Spirit, guided by that inspiration, if we feel and commit ourselves as bearers of a promise, that we have to have that boldness, that parousia of the Holy Spirit to say yes. Not to some big plan of evangelization tomorrow, but the boldness to cross a border. Someone introduced themselves, or introduced this idea of missionary discipleship, that a missionary is someone who crosses a border. but often the border is our own pew. Often the border is the person that we don't know. The border is the uncomfortableness we have to feel awkward introducing ourselves or to start a conversation about faith. To be willing to say yes and the boldness to cross that border is at the heart of spiritual accompaniment and missionary discipleship. So I think we're concluding with this session before Mass, which will start about 10 minutes. But thank you all again for being with me together and the opportunity to be here with you. Thank you very much.